For this demo, I'm going to show you how we've integrated Datahaven with the Jobs module in Dynamics NAV 2013. In this case, I'm going to show you how we can use Datahaven's document management capabilities to keep track of all the paperwork, including receipts and other supporting documentation that go with the expenses that are related to your jobs. And allows you to bill those expenses to the customer, and we're going to keep track of all the paperwork as you go through that process. We're going to be able to show the paperwork at all the points during that process, and we're going to be able to add any paperwork that might be missing during any step in the process as well. So just to kind of get started, we're going to go ahead and open up our job task lines, and we're going to bill all of our we're going to bill expenses to this particular job task that we have here, which is assembling the furniture. So that's going to be job task number 1210, and it's part of the Deerfield 8WP job. So I'm going to start out by entering my expenses as a purchase invoice. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a brand new purchase invoice. We'll go ahead and fill in the header information. We'll go ahead and make up an a vendor invoice number. So now, just to kind of show you what we're left with here, I've created my new invoice right here. We could see, since we didn't add any lines, our lines folder is empty over here. So we're going to go ahead and enter some lines against this invoice, and I'm going to show you how it basically builds out and gives you folders in Datahaven so you can attach documentation to each line of the invoice. I'm going to go ahead and enter a couple of lines. We're going to call this parts. Quantity is going to be 1. Make the unit cost, direct unit cost, $55. Now this is the important part to link this particular invoice line to the job. So in this case, I'm going to put in the job number, which is Deerfield. I'll start typing it, and I'll put it in there. The job task number is 1210, and I'm going to make the job line type contact, or the job unit price. Now what we're going to see, if I go over here and refresh my view, I can see now that it's given me a folder where I can now put the documentation that goes specifically with this line. So I'm going to go ahead and attach a receipt. So I'll add this receipt. It prompts me for what subtype I want to choose. So here's the 3 subtypes I've configured specifically for invoice lines: receipt, support, and parking voucher. So I'm going to call this a receipt. Click OK. So now I've associated that receipt document with this line. We open it up. You can see there that it kind of looks like a receipt. Now I'm going to go ahead and enter a couple more lines. So we'll make this one travel meals for me. We're going to do a quantity of 1, and the meal is $15. Again, we're going to bill it to the job. We're just going to use the same coding that we did above. Now finally, I'll go ahead and enter my last line. Call this mileage. You drove 50 miles. Fill it out at 52 cents per mile. And same job. Now if I go over here and refresh, now what we'll see is we have 3 folders, 1 for each line on the invoice, in which we can enter documentation. So I'm going to go ahead and add my meal receipt. Now I'm adding documents that reside on the desktop of this particular machine by clicking the folder button that's down here at the bottom of the Datahaven4Dynamics component. If I had a scanner hooked up, I could also scan the documentation, which includes receipts or any other kind of supporting documentation, directly into these lines by clicking the scan button that's down here at the bottom. You could choose Scan New Documents for line 20,000. It would add it right here. Then finally, I could also drag and drop a document right here. So in the scenario where this document might be stored in my email or on my hard drive and I just want to drag it in, and I can drop it right here and that would add it as well. So right now my third line is blank. The way we have the system set up right now, it's not going to allow you to post the invoice until you've attached documentation to every line. So that's a rule that we set up in the system. So what you're going to see is when I go to post this invoice, it stops me and it tells me that there's no documents attached to line 30,000 mileage. I'm going to go ahead and attach one. I'm going to make this one support. So now that I have documentation attached to all three of my lines, now I can post my invoice. We can see now that the invoice disappears from the screen. If I go to the Posted Documents area, I go to Posted Purchase Invoices. Here's the invoice we just created, and I can see that there's 3 lines created here. And my supporting documentation is followed along with the posting process when that invoice was posted. So now these documents are attached to the Posted Purchase Invoice lines. Now since we entered jobs for each one of these lines, these documents should also be viewable from our job as well. So let's go take a look. If I go over and I choose Ledger Entries, I can see all the usage lines that were created here. I can also see the 3 lines that I just entered, here, here, and here. If I click on the parts line, I can see that it shows the documentation that was attached for this particular line. Again, I can view the documentation. I can see that this shows the same document that we attached during the first part of the process. I also have visibility to the documents that were attached to each of the other 2 lines, since each one of these lines was entered into the ledger, into the job ledger as a usage line. So you can see how you can see the documents at each point in the process as you go through. We can also see these documents from the job planning lines. So again, we can see that 3 usage entries were created for each one of our lines. Let's make our window a little larger here. So here we can see our 3 usage lines, 2, 3, and each one contains the documentation for that particular usage line that corresponds with that line on the purchase invoice that we posted during the previous step. If we were to determine during this process that we didn't have all the documentation attached that we needed to have attached, we could still attach it at this point in the process, and it'll still be visible from all points in the process. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to attach another document. We'll pick another receipt. So now we've got 2 receipts attached to this particular document. I can go over here and look and see, even though the documents were named very similarly based on the metadata for this record, because these 2 documents are linked to the same line, I can look over here and see that there's a unique identifier that differentiates this document from the first document that I attached. We'll go back and take a look at our posted purchase invoice. We'll see that now there's 2 documents attached. So by adding a document from the job planning line, it's still reflected on the posted purchase invoice because we're still working with these lines. So now the next thing we're going to want to do is from the job plan, these 3 job planning lines, we're going to want to go ahead. These 3 job planning lines, we're going to want to go ahead and create a sales invoice. So I'm going to select and choose Create Sales Invoice. The system tells me that these 3 lines were successfully transferred to an invoice. Go take a look. I scroll down and find the sales invoice that we just created. You can see now that we have 3 lines of information. The invoice number that was used to generate this line is also included as part of the folder name in case this sales invoice was generated from multiple purchase invoices. By expanding the folders, we can see that all the documentation is attached and shown here at the sales invoice level. So finally, we're going to want to go ahead and post this invoice. So now the sales invoice is posted. If we go take a look at the posted purchase invoice, posted sales invoice, then as you would expect, we have all of our documentation shown here at the end. We've also set up the system to automatically generate a sales invoice. We go take a look at that. We can see that NAV automatically ran the report that's associated with a sales invoice and then attach it to this record. So we can see my 3 lines here. So I just as easily could have automated the outbound sending of this sales invoice. But in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark each one of these. So I'm going to say I want to mark the tree, which is going to mark the sales invoice itself along with all the supporting documentation that goes with this sales invoice. Now from here, from my marked items list, I can now choose to print or email all the documentation to get all of this documentation in the customer's hands so they have all the billing information that they need to be able to pay this invoice. So hopefully you've been able to see how Datahaven4Dynamics allows you to manage all the paper, whether it be receipts, supporting documentation, or any other kind of documentation that goes along with expenses to allow you to track your employees submitting expenses as well as being able to send the expenses along with the documentation to the customer.